She did not flinch. That was the part no one spoke of afterward, not the words themselves, not the silence that followed them, not the way the candlelight held steady even as everything else in that dining room seemed to tip sideways. What they remembered, those who were present, was that Josephine Merritt did not flinch. She set her spoon down, slowly, the way one sets down something fragile, something that deserves to be handled with care, even at the end. Her husband had set it across the length of a mahogany table, in front of his sister, his business partner, and a woman she had never met before that evening. He had said it the way men say things they have thought for a long time and finally decided they no longer need to keep to themselves. Casually. The way you mention the weather has turned. You have never been a handsome woman, Josephine. I don't know why you persist in dressing as though you were. The woman she did not know. A Mrs. Ferris, she believed, wife of the business partner, made a small sound, like a gasp that had been caught just in time and swallowed. Josephine looked at her husband. His name was Alden Merritt, and she had been married to him for 3 years and 4 months. She had kept his household, managed his accounts when his sister could not be bothered, corresponded with his tenants on his behalf, and sat at this table for 1,231 evenings. She had counted, not obsessively, just the way you count things when you are trying to understand the shape of your own life. She looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then she rose from her chair. She did not raise her voice. She did not slam a door. She did not cry, which would come later, and in private, in the way of all things that deserve more than an audience. She simply folded her napkin, once, twice, set it beside her plate, and walked out of the dining room with her spine straight, and her hands perfectly still at her sides. She heard his voice behind her, something impatient and dismissive, but she had stopped listening to Alden Merritt in the particular way that matters somewhere around the 2nd year of their marriage. What she heard instead, climbing the stairs to the room that had been hers in name only since the first winter, was something very quiet in her own chest. Something that had been waiting. The Merritt house in Harwick stood 3 stories tall and smelled of cedar and old money and the particular mustiness of rooms that are kept closed because no one uses them anymore. Josephine had arrived there in October of 1871, 23 years old, and carrying 2 trunks, and the composed expression of a woman who had been told her whole life that composure was the finest thing she could offer. Her father had arranged the marriage. He had not been unkind about it. Her father was not an unkind man, but he had been practical in the way that men of diminishing fortune learn to be practical. Alden Merritt was solvent. He had a name. He had this house and the mill outside of town, and prospects that her father's accountant had reviewed and found sufficient. What her father had not reviewed, because it was not the sort of thing that appeared in an accountant's ledger, was Alden's sister. Rowena Merritt was 34 years old, unmarried by choice or circumstance depending on who was telling the story, and she had run the Merritt household for 11 years before Josephine arrived to displace her. She had done so efficiently and with the particular authority of a woman who has made herself indispensable and knows it. She kept the keys on a ring at her belt. She approved the menus. She interviewed the staff. She did not, in the 3 years and 4 months that followed, relinquish any of these things. Josephine had tried, in the beginning. She had been patient in the manner she had been raised to be patient, quietly, without complaint, with the persistent goodwill of someone who believes that effort is eventually rewarded. She had deferred to Rowena on matters of the household. She had asked rather than directed. She had offered her assistance and accepted refusal, with grace. What she had not understood then was that her deference was not read as courtesy. It was read as confirmation. She doesn't know what she's doing, Rowena had said once, to Alden, in a room adjacent to the one where Josephine was reading. The walls in old houses are thinner than people remember. She doesn't understand how things work here. It's better if I simply continue. And Alden had said nothing. He had a gift for saying nothing at precisely the moments when nothing was the most damaging response available. Josephine had turned a page of her book and kept her eyes on the words until they meant something again. She had been raised in Virginia, in a house with wide windows, and a mother who believed that a woman's worth was measured in what she produced, not what she appeared. Her mother, Cecily Hammond, before she married, had kept the farm accounts by hand from the age of 17. Had taught herself French from a borrowed grammar, had raised 4 children and outlasted 2 fevers, and never once, in Josephine's memory, asked anyone to tell her what she was capable of. It was from her mother that Josephine had learned to read a ledger, to understand a contract, to see, beneath the polite language of a legal document, what was actually being said. It was a skill that had never once been invited in the Merritt household. She thought of her mother that night, sitting at the edge of the bed in the room, with the blue curtains that she had chosen herself, because Rowena had already chosen everything else. She thought of her and felt, for the first time in 3 years, something that was not resignation. She opened the wardrobe. She began to take things down from the shelves. She did not hurry. There was no need. Alden would not come. He had never, in their entire marriage, come to her room when she had withdrawn from him. It was a thing she had once grieved and had later come to understand as a kind of mercy. She worked methodically, the way her mother had taught her to work. The dresses she chose with care, the ones she had brought from Virginia, the ones she had purchased herself from money, set aside from the household accounts she managed, the practical ones, and one that was simply beautiful because she had allowed herself that. The books she chose even more carefully, the letters from her mother, the small watercolor of the Hammond farm that her sister had painted and sent the first Christmas, when Josephine had not come home because Rowena had already planned a dinner party for that week. She did not take the jewelry Alden had given her at their wedding. She was not certain it had been chosen by him rather than by Rowena, and it did not matter either way. It was not hers in any sense that she recognized. By 3 in the morning, she had 2 trunks packed. By 4 she had written a letter. She wrote it at the small desk by the window, in the careful, even hand her mother had cultivated in her. She wrote to Alden. She told him that she was leaving, that she was not leaving in anger. This was true. She realized as she wrote it. The anger had been replaced by something cleaner, and that she wished him well in the precise sense of those words no more. She told him the household accounts were in order and that he would find the quarterly ledger current through the end of the month. She told him she would be in touch through her family's solicitor in Richmond regarding the remainder. She did not tell him where she was going. She was not certain yet herself. She sealed the letter and left it on the hall table where the Morning Post was always placed. She thought that was fitting. Alden read his correspondence at breakfast. She carried her own trunks to the bottom of the stairs, both of them. It was harder than she had anticipated, and her arms ached by the time she set them by the front door, and she stood there a moment, breathing. Then she put on her coat. Then she opened the door. The air outside smelled of frost and something green underneath it. The kind of smell that is neither winter nor spring but belongs to the hours before anyone is awake. She stood on the top step of the Merritt house and looked at the street and felt, very briefly, the vertiginous sensation of having no idea what came next. She stepped off the porch. She went to her cousin Maura first, in Fredericksburg, 3 hours by rail, a distance that felt, when she arrived at the station and bought her ticket with money from her own purse, like something much larger than geography. Maura was 41, widowed 6 years prior, and had the kind of practicality that comes not from being told to be practical but from having survived things. She opened the door at 7 in the morning, looked at Josephine and her 2 trunks, and said, "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." She did not ask questions that first morning. She gave Josephine the room at the back of the house with the good light, and she put the kettle on and she set out bread and butter, and she let the silence be what it needed to be. It was Maura who told her, 3 days later, about the Aldgate Mill accounts. "You managed the Merritt household accounts for 3 years, she said. They were sitting at the kitchen table with the windows open, because Maura believed in air the way some people believe in prayer. You handled the correspondence with the tenants. You understand how a business property operates." "I do," Josephine said, because it was true. "Then you should know," Maura said, "that Aldgate is looking for someone to manage their books. Their man left in February, and they haven't found a replacement. Garrett Whitmore's wife mentioned it at the dry goods last Tuesday." Josephine set down her cup. "A woman," she said. "They didn't specify," Maura said, with a particular mildness that was not mild at all. "They specified competence. You'd have to speak to the manager, a Mr. Dunmore." Josephine went to speak to Mr. Dunmore on a Thursday morning. She wore the dark green dress that she had brought from Virginia, the one with the good collar, and she carried the ledger she had kept for the Merritt accounts, because it was the most efficient argument she could make. Mr. Dunmore was 63, nearsighted, and had been managing the Aldgate Mill for 22 years. He looked at her over his spectacles, with an expression that was not unkind, but was skeptical in the way of a man who has simply never encountered the particular thing standing in front of him. She placed the ledger on his desk, open to the quarterly accounts. He looked at it for a long moment. "This is your work?" he said. "Every figure," she said. 3 years, you'll find no errors." He looked at it a little longer. "Can you start Monday?" he said. It was not simple. She did not want to pretend that it was. The men at the mill looked at her with varying degrees of puzzlement, tolerance, and the specific discomfort of people who are not certain what category to place someone in. There was a foreman named Briggs who addressed every question to the wall, beside her left shoulder for the first 2 weeks, as though she were slightly to the left of where she actually stood. There was a clerk named Orrin who was 20 years old and had apparently been raised to believe that competence was distributed along the lines of obvious things like height and volume, and who spent the better part of a month revising this assumption in visible increments. She did not fight any of it directly. She simply worked. She found in the 3rd week that the Aldgate accounts had a discrepancy in the February receivables. Not large, not deliberate, but the kind of accumulated small error that compounds quietly until it becomes a significant problem. She corrected it. She wrote a summary of what she had found and what she had done, and placed it on Mr. Dunmore's desk without comment. He read it that same afternoon and came to find her. This would have been a problem by August, he said. September at the latest, she agreed. He looked at her for a moment. You're paid through the end of the month, he said. I'll see about extending that arrangement. It was not praise. In his manner, it was something better. By May, she had her own desk in the corner of the counting room that faced the window, and Briggs had started addressing questions to her actual face. And Orrin had taken to bringing her the morning tallies without being asked because he had learned that she caught things faster when she had them early. She did not know if any of them would have said they respected her. She knew that the work was done correctly, and that they knew it. She wrote to her mother every week. Her mother wrote back. She did not write to Alden. The letter from his solicitor came in the 4th month. She read it at Mora's kitchen table on a Tuesday, with the windows open again, and Mora making a careful study of her own teacup across the room. The letter was formal and precise, and said, in the language of men who are paid to be precise, that Alden Merritt wished to discuss the terms of a legal separation, and that he requested a meeting at her convenience through the respective representatives. She folded it. Well, said Mora. Yes, said Josephine. She wrote back through her own solicitor, a Mr. Aldrich in Richmond, whom her father had used, and who had treated her, in their one meeting, with the careful courtesy of a man who understood that she was not asking for his opinion. She told Mr. Aldrich what she wanted. She was specific. She had been thinking about it for 4 months, and she knew precisely what she needed, and what she was willing to concede, and where she would not move. Mr. Aldrich wrote back that her terms were reasonable, and that he saw no obstacle. There was a second letter, which was not from a solicitor. It was from Alden directly, written in his handwriting, which was the angular and slightly impatient script of a man who has always had more thoughts than patience for the recording of them. She almost did not read it. She sat with it unopened for 2 days, which she recognized as the last remaining power she had to exercise in this particular situation. And then she opened it. He wrote that he had not meant. He stopped there. Started again. He wrote that he had not understood. He stopped again. The letter had the quality of a document written by someone who has discovered too late that they do not have the language for what they are trying to say. Near the end he wrote, I did not know what I had until the house told me. It was very quiet, Josephine. It is still very quiet. She read that part twice. She did not write back immediately. She went to work, and she completed the month-end accounts. And she walked home along the river road, where the willows were beginning to show their first color. And she thought about quietness, and what it means when a house is quiet, and whether quiet is absence, or whether sometimes, in the right circumstances, it is finally just room to hear yourself think. She wrote to him in the evening. She did not write warmly. She was not certain she had warmth left for Alden Merritt, or whether what she felt was something more complicated, not hatred, because she had never been the kind of person who could sustain hatred, but not forgiveness either, not yet, maybe not ever in the full sense of the word. What she felt was more like the particular tiredness of someone who has carried something a long distance, and set it down and has not yet decided whether to pick it up again. She wrote that she had received his letter. She wrote that she was not certain what he was asking. She wrote that if he wanted to speak to her directly, she would consider it. Not warmly, not as an invitation, but as a door left ajar, rather than closed entirely. She sealed it and left it with the Morning Post. He came in June. She had not expected it, which was foolish in retrospect. She had, after all, left him a door. But there was a difference between leaving a door and expecting someone to walk through it, and she had not prepared herself for the Tuesday afternoon, when Mora appeared in the doorway of the counting room at the mill and said, with the specific careful blankness of a woman who is choosing not to editorialize, that there was a Mr. Merritt at the house. Josephine set down her pen. She walked home along the river road. He was standing on Mora's front porch. He was wearing his traveling coat, and he had taken his hat off and was holding it in both hands, the way men hold things when they are not sure what to do with themselves. He was 41 years old, and she had been married to him for 3 years and 7 months, and she had never seen him look uncertain before, and it did not, she found, make her feel any particular tenderness. It made her feel tired in a specific way, the way you feel when something that has cost you a great deal is finally quietly acknowledging the cost. Josephine, he said. Mr. Merritt, she said. He flinched, which she had not expected. She had not said it to wound him, she had said it because it was accurate. I'd like to talk, he said, if you're willing. She looked at him for a moment. The river was behind the house, and she could hear it. That low, continuous sound that she had learned to sleep to in the months since she came here. I have half an hour, she said. I need to finish the month end before tomorrow. He blinked. The month end, he repeated. I'm working, she said. I have a position here. I manage the accounts for the Aldgate mill. She paused. You didn't know that? No, he said. There are a number of things, she said, not unkindly, that you did not know. They sat on Mora's porch, in the 2 chairs that Mora had clearly arranged, and then absented herself from with tactful speed, and Alden Merritt said the things he had apparently been composing and revising for 4 months. He said them badly. He was not a man who had been taught to say things he felt, and it showed, like a muscle that has never been properly used. But she had spent 3 years listening to the things Alden did not say, and she found she could hear these ones. He said that Rowena had left. He said this first, as though he understood that it was the foundational fact from which everything else had to follow. She had gone to stay with their aunt in Charlottesville, and the house had, he stopped. He said the house had become something he did not recognize, and he had had to learn where things were kept. He said this with a faint bewilderment that would have been almost funny in other circumstances. She managed everything, he said. Yes, said Josephine, and so did I. You didn't notice either time. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I didn't. She looked at the river road. What do you want, Alden? He was quiet again, the kind of quiet that is not emptiness but thinking. I want to ask if there is anything left, he said finally, between us. I want to ask that honestly, and I want you to answer honestly. And he stopped. I want to know if I have made something that cannot be repaired. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking you to tell me the truth of it. She considered that for a long time. The afternoon light was long and amber by then. The way it gets in June in Virginia, the kind of light that makes even ordinary things look as though they are worth preserving. She had learned to notice light in the months she had been here. She had learned to notice a number of things that she had not had room to notice in the Merritt house in Harwick. I don't know yet, she said. It was the honest answer, and she gave it without apology. I'm not finished with this, she gestured. At the river, at the road, at the general direction of the Aldgate mill and her desk in the corner of the counting room that faced the window. I'm not finished with what I'm building here. I don't know if I could go back to what we were. I don't think I could survive what we were. I'm not asking you to, he said quickly. Then more slowly, I don't think I'm asking you to. You'd have to be certain, she said. I require certainty on that point. He looked at her. His hat was still in his hands. You've changed, he said. I haven't, she said. You simply didn't look. He went back to Harwick. He wrote to her, not through solicitors, but directly, in the angular, impatient handwriting. Slowly, over the months that followed, the letters became less formal, less like documents, and more like the correspondence of 2 people who were trying to learn something new about each other, and finding the process surprising in both directions. She told him about the Aldgate mill, about the receivables discrepancy, about Briggs and the wall to the left of her shoulder. She told him about Mora's kitchen table, and the windows that were always open, and the river road that smelled of willows in the evening. He told her things she had not known, that he had not chosen the furniture in the blue room, that had been Rowena, years before Josephine arrived, that he had not, in fact, known she was managing the correspondence with the tenants, that the evening she had left he had sat in the dining room alone for 2 hours before he understood that the quiet in the house was not temporary. She did not tell him she forgave him. She was not in the business of premature declarations. What she did, in November, was allow him to come again. And the time after that, what she built in those months was not what they had had before, because what they had had before was not something she was willing to return to. What she built was something she could stand in. Something that required him to see her, the actual dimensions of her, the competence and the stubbornness and the particular capacity she had for managing things that men twice her age had failed to manage. She built it on her terms, which was the only way she had ever known how to build anything that lasted. Rowena did not come back to the Merritt house. This was not negotiated explicitly. It was simply understood, in the way that some things between two people who are finally paying attention become understood without needing to be spoken, that the ring of keys belonged elsewhere now, and the menus and the correspondence and the long winter evenings at the household desk were Josephine's. If she chose to return, she chose deliberately. She came back in January, in the same two trunks, on a morning that was cold and clear, and smelled of frost the way the first morning had smelled when she left. She stood on the Merritt porch, and Alden opened the door, before she had raised her hand to knock, which told her something she had not expected to feel. She stepped inside. The house was the same, cedar and old money, and the faint smell of closed rooms. But the room at the top of the stairs, the room with the blue curtains, had been opened. She could see from the hall that the windows had been let in air. She did not say anything about it. She simply carried her own trunk up the stairs, the way she had carried it down, and set it at the foot of the bed, and stood for a moment at the window with the blue curtains that she had chosen herself, looking at the street below. Then she unpacked.